I always thought my life with Emily was a quiet masterpiece, a canvas painted with steady strokes of trust and routine. We'd been married for 12 years, living in a modest house on the edge of town, where the trees whispered secrets to the wind. I'm James, a structural engineer by trade, a man who finds comfort in blueprints and the certainty of steel beams. Emily worked at the library, her days surrounded by books and soft voices. Our evenings were predictable: dinner at 7, a glass of wine, maybe a show on TV before bed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. That morning, though, something felt off. I'd come home early from a site inspection, my boots still dusted with concrete powder, expecting to surprise her with takeout from that Italian place she loved. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. Too quiet. Her car was in the driveway, but the usual hum of her presence, the clatter of dishes or the faint rustle of pages, was absent. I called her name, my voice bouncing off the walls. No answer. My stomach tightened, a knot I couldn't explain. I climbed the stairs, my work bag still slung over my shoulder, and that's when I heard it. A low murmur, a sound that didn't belong, came from our bedroom. The door was ajar, just enough for me to see without being seen. Emily was there, her back to me, her auburn hair spilling over her shoulders. She wasn't alone. Standing too close, his hand brushing her arm, was Mark. Mark freaking Thompson, our neighbor, the guy who'd mowed our lawn when I threw my back out last summer. They weren't doing anything overt. Not yet. But the air crackled with something unspoken, something intimate. My chest burned, and I stepped back, silent as a ghost, retreating downstairs before they noticed. I sat in the kitchen, the takeout bag unopened, my mind racing. Was I imagining it? Misreading a friendly moment? But the way he'd touched her, the way she hadn't pulled away, it gnawed at me. I didn't confront her that night. I played the part of the oblivious husband, smiling through dinner as she chatted about library gossip. But I couldn't unsee it. That night, lying beside her, I stared at the ceiling, plotting my next move. I needed proof, something concrete, before I let this unravel me. The next few days were a slow descent into obsession. I couldn't shake the image of Mark's hand on her arm, the casual ease of it, like he'd done it before. I started watching Emily more closely, cataloging her habits. She'd always been a creature of routine: coffee at 6, out the door by 7:30, home by 5. But now I noticed the cracks. She'd linger with her phone, her thumbs tapping out messages she didn't share. She'd laugh at nothing, a private little sound that made my skin crawl. I decided to dig deeper. I'm not a tech genius, but I know my way around a computer. One night, while she showered, I borrowed her phone. She'd changed her passcode, a small detail that hit like a punch. I didn't crack it that night, but I found other ways. Our Wi-Fi router logs every device, every connection. I spent hours in my office, the glow of my laptop casting shadows, sifting through data. There it was, her phone pinging late at night, connecting to a messaging app one didn't recognize. Cross-referencing the times, I saw patterns. Nights I'd been at the office late. She'd been active, her digital footprint stretching into the early hours. Then came the real blow. I installed a tiny camera in the living room, one of those nanny cams disguised as a clock. Felt dirty, invasive, but I needed to know. 2 days later, I had footage. Mark came over while I was at work, slipping through the back door like he owned the place. They sat on our couch, my couch, laughing, their knees touching. She leaned into him, her hand resting on his thigh for a moment too long. My jaw clenched as I watched, the timestamp burning into my brain. 2:17 p.m., Wednesday. I replayed it over and over until the betrayal was a living thing inside me. I didn't confront her yet. Anger simmered, but I'm a patient man. I'd built bridges that could withstand storms. I could build a plan to match. Mark wasn't just some stranger. He was a real person, a fixture in our lives. He'd eaten at our table, borrowed my tools. That made it worse, somehow. I started researching him, digging into his life. He worked construction, had a wife named Lisa, 2 kids. Picture-perfect family, or so it seemed. I wondered if Lisa knew, if she sensed the fracture in her own home. I'd find out soon enough. The more I learned, the uglier it got. Mark wasn't just a casual flirt, he was methodical. I tailed him one afternoon, keeping my truck a safe distance behind his beat-up Ford. He stopped at a hardware store, then a coffee shop, then a motel on the edge of town. Not our town, but close enough. He didn't see me, didn't suspect the gray hoodie and sunglasses shadowing his every move. I watched him meet Emily there the next day, her car parked discreetly behind a dumpster. They disappeared into room 12 for an hour. I didn't need to see inside to know what was happening. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, but I stayed calm. Evidence was my weapon. Back home, I pieced it together. The motel receipts I found in her purse, crumpled, hidden in a zippered pocket, matched the dates. She'd paid cash, but the timestamps aligned with her errands. I cross-checked her library schedule. She'd been taking longer lunches, blaming budget meetings. Lies stacked on lies. I even hacked into Mark's social media, a sloppy profile full of fishing trips and family photos. But there were gaps, days he'd posted nothing, days that matched her absences. It was a puzzle, and I was solving it piece by bitter piece. I started losing sleep, my mind a battlefield of doubt and rage. Emily noticed, asked if I was okay. I lied, said it was work stress. She bought it or pretended to. We were both playing roles now, a twisted theater of normalcy. I wondered how long it had been going on. Weeks? Months? Had she laughed at me behind my back? Her voice soft with pity as she tangled herself in Mark's world? The thought fueled me, sharpened my focus. I decided to test her. I told her I'd be out of town for a conference. A lie to see what she'd do. She nodded, her eyes flickering with something. Relief. Maybe. I didn't leave, though. I parked down the street that night, watching our house. Mark's truck rolled in at 9:04 p.m., headlights off. He stayed until midnight. I sat there, engine idling, my knuckles white. It wasn't enough to catch them anymore. I wanted them to feel the weight of it, to suffer like I was suffering. Revenge took root in me like a weed, sprawling and relentless. I didn't want a quick confrontation, a shouting match that'd end in tears and apologies. No, this needed to be surgical, a slow bleed they couldn't escape. I started with Mark's wife, Lisa. She deserved to know, but I'd use it to my advantage. I printed stills from the nanny cam, blurry but unmistakable. Emily and Mark, cozy on our couch. I mailed them to Lisa anonymously, no note, just the images in a plain envelope. Let her wonder, let her stew. I knew she'd confront him eventually, and I'd be watching when she did. Next, I turned to Emily's world. The library was her sanctuary, her pride. I called in a favor with a friend at the county office, got access to their funding records. A few tweaks, some forged emails, and whispers of mismanagement started circulating. Nothing traceable to me, just enough to put her job under scrutiny. She came home one night, frazzled, muttering about audits and misplaced receipts. I nodded sympathetically, pouring her wine, my face a mask of concern. Inside, I felt a dark thrill. Her perfect little life was fraying, and she didn't even know why. I kept tabs on Mark, too. His construction gig relied on reputation, small-town trust. I spread rumors through a burner phone, texts to his crew, hints of shoddy work, missed deadlines. Jobs dried up, his phone stopped buzzing with offers. I saw him at the gas station one day, his jaw tight, eyes tired. Good. Let him squirm. I wasn't done yet. I found his truck's registration, dug into his finances. A late payment here, a lien there, little nudges to tip him toward ruin. He'd built his betrayal on my goodwill. I'd dismantle his life brick by brick. Emily started pulling away, her smiles forced, her excuses flimsy. She didn't suspect me, not yet, but she felt the pressure. I played dumb, asking innocent questions. How's Mark? How's Lisa? She'd stiffen, change the subject. I let her think she was safe, that I was still the clueless husband. But every night I planned. I'd sit in my office, blueprints of their destruction spread across my desk. Not steel and concrete, but lies and consequences. It was a structure only I could see, and it was beautiful. The cracks widened. Lisa must have gotten the photos, because Mark's truck stopped showing up at our house. Emily grew restless, her phone glued to her hand, her excuses piling up. Late nights at the library, sudden errands. I let her think I didn't notice, but I tracked everything. The motel visits stopped, too, replaced by hurried meetings in a park 2 towns over. I followed once, watched them argue under a sagging oak, her arms crossed, his hands waving. She looked desperate, he looked trapped. I smiled from my truck, hidden in the dusk. Lisa filed for divorce a week later. I saw the paperwork at the courthouse, public record for anyone curious enough to look. Mark moved into a cheap apartment, his kids' toys absent from the yard. Emily didn't mention it, but I saw the strain in her eyes, the way she'd stare out the window like she was waiting for something. I kept the pressure on. The library audit escalated. Her boss called her in, questioned her spending. She came home crying, said they might fire her. I held her, murmured comforts, while inside I calculated the next move. Mark's life kept crumbling. His crew quit, his truck got repossessed. I heard he'd started drinking, slurring complaints at the bar about bad luck. I didn't stop there. I sent an anonymous tip to his landlord. Photos of his apartment, trash piled up, lease violations. Eviction loomed. Emily felt it, too, her affairs fallout bleeding into her days. She'd snap at me over nothing, her guilt a live wire. I stayed calm, steady, the eye of her storm. Then I upped the ante. I hacked her email, found messages to Mark. Pleased to meet, apologies, promises. I forwarded them to Lisa, to Emily's boss, to our neighbors, all from a ghost account. The replies flooded in shock, anger, pity. Emily's phone lit up with calls she wouldn't answer. She looked at me that night, pale, trembling, and asked if I'd heard the rumors. I shrugged, said people talk. She didn't sleep. Neither did I, but for different reasons. My revenge was blooming, and I was just getting started. The fallout was a symphony, every note hitting just right. Emily's world started collapsing faster than I'd expected. Her phone buzzed incessantly now. Friends, co-workers, even her sister, all demanding answers about the leaked emails. She tried to play it off, told me it was a prank, some hacker with a grudge. I nodded, feigning concern, offering to call the police. She waved it away, her voice tight, and I let it drop. She didn't know I was the conductor, orchestrating every chord of her chaos. Mark was a mess, too. I drove by his apartment one night, saw him slumped on the steps, a bottle in hand, his face shadowed by defeat. Lisa had taken the kids to her parents, and the divorce papers were piling up legal fees he couldn't pay. I'd made sure of that. Small, anonymous donations to her lawyer kept the case grinding forward. His construction buddies stopped calling. The rumors I'd planted had taken root. He was alone now, a man unmoored, and I savored it. Emily's job hung by a thread. The library board called her in for a closed-door meeting, and she came home pale, muttering about suspension. The forged emails I'd slipped into the audit trail, suggesting she'd skimmed funds for personal use, had done their work. She didn't suspect me, not yet, but I saw the cracks in her facade. She'd sit at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, her fingers twisting her wedding ring. I'd ask what was wrong, my tone gentle, and she'd snap, saying I wouldn't understand. I understood more than she'd ever know. I kept pushing. I found Mark's sister online, a chatty woman who posted about family woes. I sent her a burner message, posing as an old friend, dropping hints about his secret life. She took the bait, called him out publicly on her page. The post went viral in our small town. Neighbors shared it, speculated, judged. Emily saw it too. I caught her scrolling, her eyes wide, before she slammed her phone down. She didn't mention it, but the tension in our house thickened, a storm brewing behind her silence. I decided to tighten the screws. Emily's suspension became official, unpaid, pending investigation. She cried in our bedroom, the door locked, thinking I couldn't hear. I stood outside, listening, my heart cold. She'd built this prison herself, brick by brick, with every lie she'd told me. I wasn't done dismantling her, though. I turned to her social circle next. She'd always been the quiet darling of our neighborhood book club, the one who hosted teas and smiled through small talk. I changed that. Using a fake profile, I posted in the group's online chat vague accusations, hints of scandal tied to those leaked emails. I didn't name her outright, just sowed seeds. Someone's not who she seems. Asterisk, check your inboxes, ladies. Asterisk, the replies exploded, curiosity, then outrage. By morning, she'd been uninvited from the next meeting, her texts to the group unanswered. She came downstairs, red-eyed, saying they'd turned on her. I hugged her, murmured platitudes, while inside I pictured their whispers, their pointed stares. Mark's spiral deepened. His landlord evicted him. Those photos I'd sent sealed the deal. I watched him load a duffel into his truck, the last of his life in cardboard boxes. He didn't see me parked across the street, didn't know I tipped off a local reporter. 2. A small piece ran in the paper. Asterisk, local man's fall from grace. Asterisk, no names, but enough details for anyone in the know. Emily read it, her hands shaking, and asked if I thought it was about Mark. I shrugged, said maybe, and watched her squirm. That night, I planted the next seed. I left a note on her car, typed and unsigned. Asterisk, I know what you did. So does he. Asterisk, she found it in the morning, her face draining of color. She didn't show it to me, just crumpled it and drove off to where I didn't care. I'd follow later. The note was a spark. I wanted her paranoia to ignite, to burn through whatever lies she still clung to. She'd feel me closing in, even if she didn't know it was me. Emily started unraveling. She'd pace the house, muttering to herself, jumping at every creak. The note had hit its mark. She didn't trust her own shadow anymore. I kept my distance, playing the oblivious husband, but I watched her every move. She'd sneak calls in the bathroom, her voice hushed, frantic. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew who was on the other end. Mark, clinging to her like a lifeline, both of them drowning in the mess I'd made. I struck at Mark next, harder this time. His truck, his last tether to independence, was parked outside a dive bar. I waited until he stumbled inside, then slashed 2 tires quick and quiet. Not enough to strand him forever, just enough to bleed his savings dry. I'd learned he was broke, scraping by on odd jobs. To tow a repair, he'd feel it. I drove off before he staggered out, imagining his curses, his fists clenched in the dark. Emily's paranoia grew teeth. She installed a lock on her phone, changed her email passwords. I saw the alerts on our shared laptop before she deleted them. She thought she was hiding, but I was already inside her digital walls. I'd mirrored her accounts weeks ago, every message a window into her panic. She wrote to Mark. Asterisk, someone knows. We need to stop. Asterisk, he replied. Asterisk, too late. Lisa's got everything. Asterisk, I smiled, saving screenshots. Their desperation was my fuel. I upped the ante at home. I left subtle signs. Her favorite mug moved. A drawer left open. Things she'd notice but couldn't prove. She'd ask if I'd been in her things. I'd deny it, all innocence. Her eyes darted, searching mine for lies, but I'd mastered the mask. She started sleeping downstairs, claiming insomnia, but I knew she was scared. Good. Fear was the point. I wanted her to feel hunted, cornered, the way I'd felt watching her with him. The neighborhood turned on them both. Lisa, fueled by those emails, started talking, coffee shop confessions, tearful rants to anyone who'd listen. Word spread like wildfire. Emily, the quiet librarian, and Mark, the friendly neighbor, tangled in something sordid. People stared when she left the house, whispered when I mowed the lawn. I played dumb, shrugging off their pitying looks, but I'd lit the match. Every sidelong glance was a victory. Mark hit rock bottom. His truck broke down, those tires were just the start, and he couldn't fix it. I heard he'd pawned tools, sold his fishing gear, anything to stay afloat. He crashed on a buddy's couch, a ghost of the man who'd swaggered into my home. I sent another anonymous tip, this time to the bar owner. Mark's tab was overdue, his welcome worn out. They cut him off, left him nowhere to hide. I pictured him alone, staring into a cracked mirror, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Emily cracked under the pressure. She quit the library before they could fire her. Came home with her resignation letter crumpled in her fist. She didn't tell me why, just said she needed a break. I nodded, poured her tea, asked if she'd be okay. She stared at me, searching, then looked away. That night, she tried calling Mark. I saw the attempt logged on her phone. No answer. He was gone, cut off, and she was floundering. I let her flail, my silence a blade she didn't see. I planted one more twist. I mailed her a photo, her and Mark at the motel, grainy but clear, taken from my truck that day. No note, just the image postmarked from out of state. She found it in the mailbox, gasped, and hid it in her purse. I watched from the window, saw her hands tremble. She didn't confront me, didn't dare. She thought it was someone else, some phantom closing in. I let her believe it, let her drown in the not knowing. My revenge was a tide, pulling her under. Emily broke. She came to me one night, sobbing, her face a wreck of guilt and fear. She confessed, stammered out the affair, Mark's name tumbling from her lips like a curse. She said it was over, begged me to forgive her, to help her figure out who was tormenting her. I listened, stone-faced, as she spilled it all. The motel, the lies, the stolen moments. She didn't know I'd seen it firsthand, didn't know I'd engineered her ruin. I took her hands, promised we'd get through it, my voice steady as steel. Mark didn't fare better. I heard he'd left town, a broken man with a duffel and no plan. His buddy kicked him out, his family shut him down. Lisa had the house, the kids, everything he'd built. I'd made sure she'd win. I sent one last gift. A letter to his new address, wherever he'd landed, with photos of him and Emily, timestamps circled. They all know, I wrote and signed. Let him carry that weight, let it crush him wherever he ran. Emily clung to me now, fragile, dependent. I played the part, supportive husband, wounded but willing to heal. She didn't work, barely left the house. Her world shrunk to our four walls. The neighborhood shunned her. The book club erased her. Her sister stopped calling. She checked the mail daily, flinching at every envelope, waiting for the next blow. I stopped sending them, let her dread fill the silence. She'd lost everything. Her job, her lover, her pride, and I'd stripped it away, piece by piece. I wasn't done, though. The final act loomed, a crescendo I'd been building toward. I'd let her think we were rebuilding, let her lean on me until she couldn't stand alone. Then I'd pull the rug out, reveal the architect of her misery. Not yet, though. For now, I watched her crumble, my revenge a quiet triumph. She'd betrayed me with a real person, a man I trusted, and I'd turned their lives to ash. The best part? She still called me her rock, oblivious to the storm I'd become. Emily leaned on me more every day, a fragile shell of the woman I'd married. She'd stopped checking her phone, nobody called anymore, and the house became her cage. I encouraged it subtly, suggesting she rest, stay home, let me handle things. She'd nod, grateful, her eyes hollow. I cooked her meals, paid the bills, played the devoted husband while the gears of my plan kept turning. She thought we were healing. I knew we were coasting toward the edge. Mark was a faint echo now, a rumor whispered in town. I tracked him through a contact at the DMV new address, some nowhere town 3 states over. He'd found a job, a warehouse gig, scraping by. Couldn't let that stand. I sent a package to his employer. Photos, those same motel shots, with a note. Asterisk hire at your own risk. Asterisk no signature, no trace. A week later, my contact confirmed. Mark was fired, back to square one. I pictured him staring at the walls of another cheap rental, the weight of his choices crushing him, and it felt right. At home, I fed Emily's isolation. I'd mention neighbors in passing. Asterisk, saw Mrs. Carter today. She asked about you, asterisk. Watching her flinch, knowing she couldn't face them. Her world shrank to me, her only tether, and I tightened the knot. I'd catch her staring at our wedding photo, tears streaking her face, and I'd ask what was wrong. She'd mumble apologies, promises to be better. I'd smile, pat her hand, my mind already on the next step. She didn't deserve peace, not after what she'd done. I started leaving hints, testing her. A motel keychain on the counter, gone by morning. She'd found it, said nothing. A receipt for takeout from that Italian place, dated the day I'd seen them, slipped into her purse. She paled but stayed silent. Her paranoia flared anew. Her questions sharper. Asterisk, have you been going through my things? Asterisk, I denied it, calm as ever, and she'd back off, doubt gnawing at her. I wanted her to feel the walls closing in, to sense the truth without grasping it. The game shifted when Emily found a letter I'd forgotten on my desk. It was fake, typed in a font she wouldn't recognize. Addressed to me. Asterisk, I saw them together. She's not who you think. Asterisk, she confronted me, trembling, asking if I'd known all along. I played dumb, furrowed my brow, said it must be a prank. She didn't buy it, not fully. Her eyes searched mine, probing for cracks. I held steady, but the seed was planted. She started watching me, too, a quiet suspicion blooming between us. Mark's life kept crumbling, a distant ripple I monitored. I'd hacked his email, amateur security laughably weak, and found pleas to Lisa, begging to see the kids. I forwarded them to her lawyer, ensuring she'd tighten the screws. His replies stopped. She'd cut him off completely. I sent one last message from a burner. Asterisk, you'll never outrun it. Asterisk, he didn't respond, but I knew it landed. He was a ghost now, haunting his own wreckage, and I'd made him that way. Emily's unraveling accelerated. She'd pace at night, muttering about cameras, shadows, someone watching. I'd comfort her, suggest a doctor, knowing she'd refuse. She didn't trust anyone anymore, not even herself. I fed the fire, moved her car keys, hid her favorite scarf, little disruptions she couldn't explain. She'd snap, accuse me of playing tricks, then apologize, sobbing. I'd hold her, whisper reassurances, my voice a velvet trap. She was breaking, and I was the fracture running through her. I decided it was time for the reveal, but not yet the full truth. I left a USB drive on the kitchen table, labeled asterisk, for Emily. Asterisk, she found it while I was at work, plugged it into her laptop. I'd rigged a remote viewer to watch. It held clips from the nanny cam, her and Mark on our couch, laughing, touching. She gasped, dropped the drive, her hands shaking. When I got home, she was wild-eyed, demanding who'd sent it. I shrugged, said I'd found it in the mailbox. Her scream echoed through the house. She knew someone had her secrets, but not that it was me. Emily stopped sleeping. She'd sit in the dark, staring at nothing, the USB drive clutched in her hand like a talisman. She didn't ask me about it again, didn't dare. I saw the fear in her, fear of me, of the unknown, of the life she'd lost. I kept up the charade, cooking breakfast, asking about her day, my tone light. She'd mumble responses, her voice a threadbare whisper. I'd won her trust only to twist it, and now she was adrift, tethered to a lie. Mark's endgame came into focus. I found his new number through a skip trace, called from a blocked line. He picked up, voice rough, wary. I didn't speak, just played a recording of Emily's confession, her sobs filling the silence. He hung up, but I knew it hit. I mailed him one last package. A photo of his kids with Lisa, smiling, and a note. Asterisk, they're better off without you. Asterisk, I wanted him to feel the final cut. The loss of everything he'd betrayed me for. He wouldn't recover, not from that. At home, I tightened the noose. I staged a break-in. Smashed a window, scattered papers, left muddy footprints from boots she wouldn't recognize. She found it when I was at work, called me in a panic. I rushed home, played the shocked husband, called the cops. They found nothing, of course, no prints, no clues. Emily clung to me, terrified, begging me to keep her safe. I promised I would, my arms around her, while I planned the final blow. She'd never see it coming. I left one more clue. A handwritten list in my office, half hidden. Dates, times, places she'd met Mark, all in my scrawl. She found it that night, confronted me with it, her voice shaking. Asterisk, what is this, James? Asterisk, I stared at her, let the silence stretch, then said, asterisk, what do you think it is? Asterisk, she froze, the pieces clicking, but not fully. I walked away, left her standing there, the truth a shadow she couldn't yet name. She'd figure it out soon, and I'd be ready. Emily's collapse was complete. She barely spoke now, her days a haze of staring out windows, jumping at shadows. The list had broken something in her. She didn't ask again, didn't accuse, just retreated into herself. I saw the realization dawning, slow and jagged, but I didn't rush it. I wanted her to stew, to feel the weight of every choice she'd made. The house was a mausoleum, her presence a ghost haunting my victory. Mark vanished from my radar. My last package must have hit too hard, no new job, no trace. I pictured him wandering, a shell of a man, his life a rubble I'd left behind. I didn't need to check anymore. He was finished, a footnote in my revenge. Emily was the focus now, the final act of my play. I'd stripped her of everything, job, friends, lover, sanity. And still, she didn't know the half of it. I started the end game. I left photos around the house, her and Mark, moments I'd captured, each with a date scrawled on the back. She'd find them, under her pillow in her coat pocket, and say nothing, just tuck them away, her hands trembling. I'd catch her staring at me, questions in her eyes she wouldn't voice. I'd smile, ask if she was okay, my tone a blade disguised as kindness. She'd nod, look away, trapped in her own mind. The night I revealed it, I cooked her favorite meal, lasagna, a nod to better days. She ate in silence, her fork scraping the plate. I set a folder beside her, thick with evidence. Nanny cam stills, motel receipts, emails, the list. She stared at it, then at me, her breath shallow. You knew, she whispered. I nodded, leaned back, and said, asterisk, from the start. Asterisk, her face crumpled, tears falling, but I wasn't done. Asterisk, every move you made, I turned against you. Every lie you told, I built into this. Asterisk, she sobbed, begged me to stop, but I kept going, detailing every step. Lisa, the library, Mark's ruin. She slid to the floor, a broken thing, and I stood over her, calm, complete. Emily didn't fight back. She sat there, crumpled, as I laid out the wreckage I'd wrought. I told her how I'd mailed the photos, hacked her life, turned her world to ash. She didn't scream, didn't plead, just stared, her eyes empty, like I'd hollowed her out. I finished with Mark, his eviction, his kids, his collapse, and she flinched, the last thread snapping. I left the folder open, evidence spilling across the table, and walked out, leaving her to drown in it. She didn't leave the house after that. I moved to the guest room, kept my routine, work, home, silence. She'd shuffle around, a shadow, avoiding me. I'd catch her staring at the photos, tracing the dates, piecing together her own destruction. I didn't need to do more. The truth was her prison now. She'd call out sometimes, soft apologies in the night, but I didn't answer. She'd betrayed me with a real person, a man I trusted, and I'd repaid it tenfold. Mark's fate sealed itself. A week later, I got word through a mutual friend. He'd been found in a motel, alone, a bottle of pills empty beside him. No note, no fight left. I didn't feel guilt, didn't feel triumph, just a quiet nod, like a job finished. Emily heard, too. I saw the news on her laptop, left open. She didn't cry, just sat there, her face a mask. I'd taken him from her twice, once in life, now in death. Months passed. Emily stayed, a husk, dependent on me for every bill, every meal. I filed for divorce, served her papers she didn't contest. She signed, her hand shaking, and I sold the house, left her with nothing but a rented room and the folder. I walked away, my life rebuilt. New job, new town, no traces of her. She'd live with it, the cruel mirror I'd held up, reflecting her betrayal until her last breath. I'd crafted a revenge not of fists or shouts, but of shadows and silence, and it was perfect.